Good morning, everyone. This is Valerie Gupte from People Matters, and we are back with an exciting session of our webcast in partnership with the Center for Creative Leadership on a very exciting topic. Today's topic for the webcast is learn how to apply nudging to leadership development. Companies invest heavily in leadership development. According to one estimate, about $14 billion were spent by companies annually on leadership development. Still, there continue to be a lot of challenges, primarily due to the lack of measurement, lack of contextual support, and not addressing the mindset question. Amid a variety of new approaches, nudging is emerging as an effective method of training the next generation of leaders. Nudge is a concept in behavioral science which introduces positive reinforcement and indirect suggestions as a way to influence behavior. It was brought to light by the Nobel Prize winning economist Richard Thaler. The nudging approach can directly impact blended and purely digital leadership development. This webcast will delve into how to apply the concept of nudging in the right way in your particular workspace and your own work life. Here are a few discussion pointers that will be covered during this webcast. What is nudging and why is it effective? How can you apply the concept of nudging to developing new leaders? How are the tools that you can leverage to integrate your learning? How can you integrate the concept of nudging with your already existing learning initiatives? And what should L&D and HR heads know about measuring the effectiveness of such a type of leadership development? I take the pleasure to invite and introduce today's speaker, Samir Mehta. He is a blended learning leader for Center of Creative Leadership. Samir joined CCL in 2013 and serves as the Digital Learning Products Manager at CCL. He works with various groups at CCL to ensure that digital learning products and blended learning solutions are designed and delivered seamlessly for CCL's clients. He enjoys designing learning journeys for sophisticated, discerning professionals that are truly immersive and blended. Samir received his Bachelor of Engineering degree from the University of Pune in India. He has an MBA from the Indian School of Business. He led the special interest group on mobile and e-learning for the ASTD Valley of the Sun chapter in Phoenix. Samir also serves as an adjunct faculty at the NIIT University in India. So, Samir, welcome to the webcast. It's a pleasure to have you.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Valerie. It's a pleasure to be back. It's been fun doing the last two webcasts. So, really thrilled to be doing this one. It's a bit of a different topic. So, I'm excited to engage. So, I'll go ahead and share my screen. Is that okay?
Yes, definitely. I was just going to talk about our partners for today, and thank you to Center for Creative Leadership, which is a top-ranked global provider of leadership development. Thank you for Center for Creative Leadership, and thank you, Samir, for being here. We are excited to start off this new topic. For our audience members, we have saved some time towards the end of the webcast for your questions. So please make sure you ask your questions in the comment box anytime during the session, and Samir will be taking of the questions towards the end. We have an exciting topic for you today, and Samir, please take it away from here.
Awesome. Thanks,
Thank you.
Valerie. And please let me know if you can't see my screen or if my audio goes bad. Of course, if my audio has gone bad, then I may not be able to hear you, in which case this will be interesting.
We can hear you perfectly right now.
Okay, perfect.
And
And
we
you can
can
see
see
my
your
screen as
screen
well?
as well. Yes, perfect.
Wonderful. Awesome. Thanks so much. So, thanks everyone for making the time today. Really appreciate you sharing your time with us. And this is an interesting topic, this idea of nudging and what does it mean in leadership development. So, I'm going to share some of our thoughts as the center, some experiments that we have tried so far, and I'm open to learning. It's very much an emergent field, so by no means do I claim that I have all the answers or even really all the questions, but I'll dive in. Just a little bit about the center. I really appreciate Valerie's introduction of me, but I'm just a learning and tech guy that loves to dabble in this stuff. Um I'm very fortunate to work at the Center for Creative Leadership. We've spent over 50 years focused on leadership education, creating better leaders for a better world. We work with over 80% of the Fortune 100 companies. We have dedicated teams of researchers, many of whom I am really leaning on for today's presentation, and I'll specifically call out some of them. We do our work on 6 continents, and we consistently get ranked highly in the Financial Times for executive education, as well as receive other awards. And these awards are only important to us because we apply for awards that are ranked by our clients. We appreciate the work that we do, the opportunity that we have to work with leaders, and when that work is recognized as best in class, then we feel like we're doing our job well. That's a little bit about us. Um, 70 20 10 is where I'll start today. Um, and I start here because what a lot of people don't know is that CCL actually did the original research back in the 70s that led to this principle of how do people develop. We asked people essentially that question, and they came back with a lot of responses which then were themed into these 3 key areas, and there was actually a fourth which was moved off because it's not something you want to design into leader development. It was challenging assignments, developmental relationships, learning from others, coursework and training, and there was personal adversity. That was the fourth, actually. But we said we don't want to design personal adversity into people development, and so the researchers at the time brought it down to these 3 categories, which in that original research had a percentage of 70 20 10. And it's really interesting how this has sort of become a slogan in the industry, and we've actually done a lot of research following that original one. The book to the left, Lessons of Experience, is the original research that asked about what experiences had the greatest impact on senior executives. But since then, we've published a number of books which align with a lot of research that we've done around the world. I've cited one in particular that a researcher, Meena Wilson, did specifically in India, but there have been research studies done on different demographics across time, and we have very specific recommendations that go down that path of, okay, if people learn through experience, how do you design for that? So I'll just put this out there because I think this guides some of what I'm going to share. So, what is experience driven leader development, right? Individuals broaden and deepen their leadership capabilities as they do leadership work. There are good reasons to believe that learning from experience is the number one way that leader development happens. Yet, this number one driver of learning gets the least attention in most leader development systems. This sort of happens organically, but we don't design for it more often than not in what we see. And so, what we talk to our clients about, the recommendations we make very often are figuring out, knowing what experiences matter, what they potentially teach, giving people with potential the opportunity to engage in those experiences, increasing the odds that people will learn, because just having an experience is one thing, but how do you reflect on it is critical. And weaving the learning from experience into the fabric of the organization. And these things are not easy, but they are important. And so, in thinking about experience driven leader development and even just regular leader development through coursework and training, really started to think about nudging a lot. And I'm a big fan. Valerie mentioned I got my MBA. One of the courses that I really got drawn into was economics, microeconomics, macroeconomics. But really, at the time, this is back in 2007, within microeconomics, we were talking game theory, we were talking behavioral economics as sort of a emergent field. And at the time, Richard Thaler was just some guy at the University of Chicago. He wasn't the Nobel Prize winning person, and the first Freakonomics book had just come out. So at that time, it was not a prevalent theory. I mean, now nudging gets talked about a lot, and Freakonomics is, two books and a very successful podcast. But if you want to get into sort of just behavioral economics and nudging, these are four really good places to start. The book Nudge itself by Thaler and Sunstein. Thaler's book Misbehaving is really fun, sort of goes into the history of the field. Hidden Brain by Shankar Vedantam is a really good podcast, and Freakonomics. So I found a lot of interesting cases, and it points to a lot of great research. So just wanted to share this for anyone that wants to go into it. But I'll dive into sort of nudging and how people think, uh, and the sort of inherent biases that we have, some of which come through evolution and some of which come through our environment. But if you ask most people, how good are you at buying cars? Most people will say, you know what, I'm great at buying cars. I negotiate really well when I go in to buy a car. And then, if you think about how good do you think car salesmen are at selling cars? And you're like, those guys, come on, I've typically I'm so much more serious and professional than them. But if we think that practice makes perfect, the average car buyer buys a car every 5 years. The average car salesman sells 10 cars a month. So in 5 years, since you bought your last car, the average salesman sold 600 cars. Who do you think is better at this game, right? And this plays out in some critical ways. So what comes about is that some of the biggest decisions we make in our life, we only make a few times. We buy clothes a lot. We buy cars. Okay, you bought a great car, you paid a little bit more, not the end of the world. What college you chose. If you chose well, life goes a certain way. If you didn't choose particularly well, life goes a very different way. Marriage, I won't dwell on the topic, but obviously there's a high cost to that mistake. If you buy a house poorly, there is a very high cost to that mistake. There is research specifically with zip codes in the United States that proves that where you live is probably the strongest indicator to your likelihood of success in terms of financial success, likelihood of going to prison, likelihood of going to college, mortality. So many things are linked with just where you live. A career path, right? Every choice we make as we go along our career, if we make bad choices, there is a continuously diverging cost of that mistake. And in terms of leadership decisions, when leaders make decisions at key points, there is a really high cost of mistake for themselves and for others. If we think back to the Satyam scenario, when Satyam kind of imploded, there was really high cost. If you think about Enron, was the most famous case. There's an extremely high cost of mistakes like those for self and others. So how can we help this? And the way you think about it is leadership development inherently is what you would call in economic terms an investment good, which means you do the work now, you incur the cost today, but you reap the benefits much, much later. And we hear this a lot in our work, which is, hey, what's the ROI on this program? Right. And I know a lot of you get that too. Like, okay, I'm pitching, you might be recommending certain leadership development to senior executives, and they'll say, what's the ROI? Show me the ROI on this. And it's really hard to do because the investments you make in leaders today, the investments they make in themselves today, only pay out a few years ahead because they don't have the scope of responsibility. They haven't actually started to show the leadership behaviors that you taught them or that they helped develop. You might show some things, and there are ways to show impact in the near term and the medium term. But for the leader, choosing to do leadership development for themselves is kind of like going to the gym. You're tired that day. It's hard, it's difficult. There is no immediate visual, right? If you start to diet and you're trying to lose weight, the first day that you diet, there is no immediate reward whatsoever. Eating chocolate, there's an immediate reward. So leadership development is an investment good, and therefore it is really hard to get people to do this. And it's very easy for people to say, let's put it off, let's do it later, let's do it later. So that makes leadership development something that is ripe for leveraging nudging as a tool. So if you look in the dictionary, a nudge means this: to prod someone gently, typically with one's elbow, in order to draw their attention to something, or a light touch or a push. And this is critical as we look at how nudging is defined. Nudging retains choice, right? So this is an important thing. What nudging does is there's two doors, there's left and right. You retain both doors, but you nudge someone towards the door that you think is better for them. You don't lock out the ability to go to door B, even if you think door A is better. You're sort of nudging them towards door A. So that's a critical element. There isn't the elimination of choice. So there are some misconceptions overall when you think about nudging. So when I say, oh, you're trying to nudge someone towards door A uh, and not door B, the pushback sometimes is, well, aren't we forcing them in that sense? And the reality is, by virtue of two doors being there and how people come to those doors, there is already some kind of influence on those people's choice. Don't you want to make it the right one? Right? If you think about choices on a form, uh, the order of those choices defines what people will see first, and so you've already influenced their choice. The question is, do you want to influence it for what you know might be better for them or not? And paternalism, this is a term again very specifically coined by Thaler and Sunstein. So paternalism means this idea of taking a parenting approach in some sense to the choices that you are setting out for people. And the idea of parenting is to say, look, I know vegetables are better for my children than sweets. Right? We know that, and therefore we put vegetables out for our children before we offer them desserts. There's that element of paternalism when we think about healthcare plans for our employees, when we think about the right leadership development programs. That's picking out and curating is kind of paternalism. And the misconception that people make when they push back on this idea of nudging is that that is coercion, that we're forcing people down a certain path. But there isn't. As long as you retain all the choices, or you've done the best job to determine what the best choices are, you haven't really coerced anyone. And the final assumption is people almost always make choices in their best interest. This is the standard view of traditional economists, right? Oh, the free market will play out, and people will always make the best choices they can. But the free market doesn't really work in those really difficult choices that I talked about, right? The free market is not playing out when you are choosing which college, because you have some limited options and you have limited time to make that decision. So the free market is not playing out when you are making career choices. And so, as HR professionals, as leadership development professionals, how can we guide people in the right directions? And that's where nudging comes in. So, what I'm going to do is talk about certain biases that people have and what kinds of nudges might we be able to give them to overcome those biases, right? That's kind of the direction I'm going to go in. So one of the concepts that the architects of uh, architects of nudging brought up is this idea of choice architects. So if you are a designer of anything, right, whether it is how you lay out food at home when people come to serve themselves, or it is as shown in this um, sort of example here, giving people choices between one package of software and another, or giving people the choice between one particular leader program and another. You have a role in presenting those choices. So what you notice here is the update button is grayed out, but you can actually click on it. And I suspect a lot of you have seen sites like these. So they're nudging you to click the upgrade button by almost making the update button invisible. So, there is a question mark about, is this ethical? And one of the things you'll notice is marketeers and salespeople have had a handle on nudging intuitively for a long, long time. So, in many ways, this is not new, but applying it to our field is somewhat new. So they talk about this idea of heuristics, and this was actually introduced by sort of Thaler's gurus, which are Tversky and Kahneman. And heuristics are essentially, our brains are hardwired to do some things intuitively. We take shortcuts, and for example, if you feel a great threat coming towards you, you want to run, right? Your brain is designed evolutionally to make these shortcuts and make these decisions quickly, but sometimes they can get you in trouble, right? So we just have to be careful about what are those times that these heuristics might get us in trouble. And I'm going to show you some of these heuristics that we take, and how they might play out. So anchoring is a very common heuristic. You see it in retail all the time. So you see this example of, like, this thing was 10,000 rupees, but now it's 7,000. More often than not, they won't show you, oh, this is 7,000, right? Um, and so that tells you, wow, I'm getting a good deal right now. I should buy this right now, right? So how might we use anchoring then, in our work? When we ask someone to consider a leadership development program for their direct report, if we said, this leadership development program, or this leadership development work will only take 5% of your direct report's time this year, that sounds like, oh, it's just 5%, as against, this will take 10 days of your direct reports time this year. So you're kind of anchoring, and you can sort of take this to another level. You can obviously make it more nuanced and more specific, but I just wanted to give you a light example of what anchoring might look like in leadership development. Another one, so for folks that have been on previous sessions, I have used polls. Today this session is really content heavy, so I'm not using polls. But give yourself this poll, while you're looking at this. What do you worry about dying from? If you have nightmares, what are you having nightmares about? Sharks, or things like sharks, tigers, and stuff like that? Terrorist attacks, ice cream, or cars on the road, right? More often than not, people have fear of sharks. There are movies about sharks, there are movies about terror attacks. There are generally no movies about ice cream or cars on the road. But if you look at the top 10 causes of deaths in 2016, this is global data, this is from WHO. Road injuries are right up there. Things like ice cream or just unhealthy eating in general causes things like diabetes. It can also cause things like strokes and heart disease. And I didn't put smoking up there, but events that more easily spring to mind, such as recent or traumatic events, will be more influential on our behavior. This is sort of called the availability heuristic. What do I remember? What do I recall most recently? And what sort of stuck in my head because of its traumatic nature? And that's going to scare me the most. That's what I'm going to think about the most. So when we sort of apply that to the leadership development, what data are we providing to individuals who are considering programs or considering a challenging assignment? Because we remember that 70-20-10, 70% is challenging assignments, right? People learn from challenging assignments. Do we tell them recent success of prior participants, or are we telling them this will take 20% of your time, or are we saying this will cost your business unit x rupees, right? Which of these are we showing first? We need to show all this information, but which one are we showing first? And something that Richard Thaler says in his book, which really stuck to me, is basically everything matters, right? No part of the information you convey, no part of how you convey it is irrelevant. Some things may be more significant than others, but the order in which you convey certain information matters. And when you think about these heuristics as you go along, just keep this everything matters piece in mind. So I want to ask you another question. Again, I won't do the poll, but here's a fact. There's a guy called Rajiv. He loves yoga and homeopathy. And the question for you is, what do you think Rajiv does for a living? Is Rajiv a yoga instructor? Is Rajiv an alternative medicine practitioner? Is Rajiv a CEO? Is Rajiv a student on a break year? So I'll give you a second. Pick one of these answers for yourself. I will assume you have picked one. And if you guessed anything other than number three, CEO, you would have probably fallen into sort of this representativeness bias. So Rajiv Bajaj, CEO of Bajaj Auto, is a student of yoga and homeopathy and actually applies them to his business. But typical stereotypes will take you to probably the other three answers, right? And our over reliance on stereotypes based on past experience gets us into trouble all the time. And we sometimes create false meaning out of randomness. So, as an example of that, are we selecting people? The question we have to ask ourselves is, are we selecting people into leadership development experiences without bias? Or do stereotypes affect our decisions? We know this. Only 24% of senior leaders are women right now. I'm not even getting into the 3% of Fortune 500 CEOs that are leaders. Indra Nui's departure will take that down. Are men selecting and sponsoring other men unintentionally, right? Is there an unconscious bias there? And then false meaning out of randomness. So I've picked sort of a silly example, but we can find more nuanced examples here. Steve Jobs was a good CEO. He's a great CEO. He wore the same shirt all the time. Therefore, leaders who wear the same shirt all the time will make good CEOs. And we read that article, right? Oh, you don't have to spend any mental effort on the shirt. Okay, that's the last thing you do. But does that make you a good CEO? Not really, right? So representativeness is critical. How do we let stereotypes or correlation accidentally replace causality in our minds? So another heuristic is optimism and overconfidence. So the typical optimism we see globally is project sort of budgeting in time and in money. People underestimate projects just chronically. This is called the planning fallacy. It exists globally. So any of you that have had projects that have overrun, in some ways take the guilt off yourself, because literally almost every project that has ever been budgeted or estimated has overrun. And even when the planners of those projects have said, we know about the planning fallacy and we will plan for it, that has overrun as well. In many ways, the agile project management methodology sort of accepts this idea that projects will run over, and works in that way. It's sort of the ultimate acceptance of the fact that projects run over. But when you think about leadership and individual leaders, optimism and overconfidence says, you know what, I have the leadership skills I need. I don't need to learn anything new. So how do we help a leader actually sometimes break that optimism and overconfidence and say, hey, look in the mirror, you're not there. And we do this through a number of ways. We do this through psychometric assessments, we do this through 360s, and I'll talk a little bit more about 360s as we get along. But I think the optimism and overconfidence heuristic becomes stronger and stronger as people experience early success in their careers, and that often sets them up for what CCL defines as derailment. So there are these five derailment factors that we know occur for leaders, and it's very hard to recover from a derailment. And therefore, how can we help people not fall into that overconfidence trap? Loss aversion is a massive, massive issue when you think about sort of a heuristic, right? The very typical example that is given around loss aversion is this idea of losing something is valued at least twice as much as gaining something. So if you tell people, would you like to bet on a coin for on a coin toss for 100 rupees? You know, heads you win 100, tails you get zero. People are more often than not okay to bet on that, but they're not okay to take 50. So there's sort of like there's an interesting loss aversion that people have, and so you have to offer sort of double to overcome loss aversion. And so if you think about a challenging assignment in leadership development, a challenging assignment comes with risk. And we know people are fundamentally loss averse, right? Someone might say, no, you know what, I'm not loss averse. I have a good risk appetite. But as a human, you are generally loss averse. So we're designing for the general human and not for the people that appear in the thumbs up ad, who are not risk averse and say they're not loss averse. So how do we make challenging assignments more attractive? And how do we clearly state that it is safe to return from a challenging assignment? Because a challenging assignment, taking on uh, a business unit that needs to be turned around, taking on a business unit that is likely to fail or needs to be shut down, right? So it's a challenging assignment, but it has to be done. There's a manufacturing plant, it needs to be shut down, or there is a division of the software firm that needs to be sold off, or needs to be hyped off and shut down. It is by definition an assignment that will end in pain, but it's an assignment that will develop a leader. How do we make that assignment attractive? And how do we make it very clear that when you come back from this, it is a safe place to come back? We know who you are, we know why you went, and what you did will be appreciated in that light. And systems are a great place to start, whether you have an HRIS where you're posting these roles, how you write these roles is a very easy place. If you look out for all of these sort of heuristics and say, think about the reader and think about what is likely to go through their mind, how do we play into that? So, framing again, kind of going back to that, if you read, of the 100 patients who have this operation, 90 are alive 5 years later. Hey, that's good news. Versus of the 100 patients who have had this operation, 10 are dead 5 years later. Uh, Same odds, exact same odds, but people who see the second statement are much less likely to agree to having that operation than the people that see the first statement. So how do we apply that to leadership development? So you take the same sort of thing. If you say 45 of the 50 participants in our leadership development experience have grown into new roles and have had positive impact on the business and stayed with our organization for a longer tenure than average for that leader level. Right? That's a positive statement. It's factual. The other statement, only 5 of the 50 participants left the company to join a competitor. This is 10% attrition, which is better than the industry average of 20%. So you're still trying to paint it in a positive light, but what am I hearing? 5 people left. You trained these people and they left. How can this possibly be a good idea? So I'm going to invest in these people and they're going to leave. So when we think about sort of framing how we sell our programs to executive sponsors, even framing is a critical way. The next one then is this idea of status quo bias. It- People tend to stick with their current situation that overcomes the inertia of change. So some of you may have seen this cartoon where this person comes into a room and they say, "Who wants change?" And everyone puts their hands up. And then, the question is, who wants to change? Which of you wants to change? And not a single hand is up. So everyone in general has a slightly negative reaction to change because we have a status quo bias, right? Uh, Newton's law, a body at rest will remain at rest. Uh, and how do we then get leaders to change behavior, right? That's what we're trying to do. Leadership development is about changing of behaviors and changing, telling someone this is the right behavior for a leader is great. Okay, I know. I didn't know before. Now I know. You gave me a new model, whatever that model was. Uh, I saw it in the classroom. We talked about it. Great. Or I saw a TED talk, right? I'm a digital learning guy. You sent me a video. I watched this video. It was very good. I was very moved at that time. I thought it was really good. Great. Um, how likely am I to remember it 2 or 3 days down the line? So, for those that attended a previous session that I did, or even you've probably seen it elsewhere, there is this idea of the forgetting curve. So, a scientist called Ebbinghaus sort of proved what we all know. Back in 1875, he proved it that people forget stuff very quickly. And so, if you're talking about changing a behavior, people say it takes about 21 days to create a new habit. Um, and learning to do certain things differently is really hard. One example we use at CCL a lot is this idea of giving feedback. Uh, and giving constructive, powerful feedback is a really hard thing to do. How do you get someone to get better at it? Because it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to say, hey, Samir, in the meeting today, your slides were unclear and this left me confused. It's hard because it puts everybody in an awkward spot. So what we worked with our partners actually, a company called Jombay, great company out of the city of Pune, which is where I'm from, but that is a coincidence. But we worked with them to actually build out a nudging app. And this is an app that essentially tries to build a habit. And so what it does, it's actually based on the 70-20-10 model as well: learn, practice, teach. And what it does is it sends you reminders, the cue or the trigger to start the habit. It sets a routine, so the action you take, and it gives you opportunities to gain rewards based on the activities you do on the app. And so, the reminder sets the routine creates the reward, and it's sort of this positive cycle. And the way we typically have seen it done with some of our clients is, essentially, the participants download the app. We identify the right competencies to go after. So again, we pick a few, right? We pick maybe one, two, or three competencies to really work on over a period of time, and very often just one in a 3-month window. And once they have the app, learners are receiving updates on the app. So the app has push capability, but a real person is assigned to sort of send these reminders over email, over SMS, over WhatsApp, because we know these people are looking at different things. And so we want to reach them on all of those places. Provide those learners with engaging, well researched, actionable content that you can apply on the job to form a routine. And it really asks you some critical questions that you have to answer. And your manager can actually view it as well. And I'll talk about sort of social influence as another really powerful nudge. Um, and so we really like this because it extends that learning experience from outside of the classroom into the workplace, allowing learners to, on a daily basis, sort of build that habit. So we've enjoyed building this app with our partners, and we've enjoyed deploying it for a few clients. So if there is interest, we'd love to talk more. Again, it really works off this 70-20-10, practice, teach, learn. And so break those steps into tiny chunks, eliminate the need to take decisions for the learner. We'll send it to them and let them see that continuous progress and feedback. So we're really seeing sort of the leveraging of technology with behavioral science, and with the ability to learn into the workplace. So moving on from sort of that piece, we know this as well. Emotional state matters. We shop more when we're hungry. This is sort of documented research. Uh, we send bad emails at night, right? The angry emails, and we often make much worse decisions as we get more tired and we sleep less. And the workplace is not getting any easier in the near term. We know this. emails aren't going to reduce. In a previous presentation, I showed that like from 2014 to 2018, I think the number of emails an average employee receives, an average knowledge worker receives per day is about 180. Most of you, my guess is most of you receive more than that per day. So the pace of work isn't going to go down, uh, but we make poor decisions as we get more tired and we sleep less. So the emotional state of a leader really matters. And so one of the things we did is we worked with one of our clients to build out a resilience program. And so when we talk about resilience, it's the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, and it's about intentionally recharging your brain, really. And so if people do it, what we showed them is you will have positive behavior change, you will spark more innovation, you will show more emotional intelligence, and you will be better at change leadership and management. These are all documented, sort of researched things. And so, but what we told them was we basically created sort of an 18-step journey for them, short 3-minute videos, which came to their inbox via email every few days. And we told them, look, you're going to spend 2% of your day on this program, right? The results you'll get are based on what you put in. If you dedicated time each day to develop yourself, if you tried each technique, you'll see impact. And we saw really good impact with these learners, with this client organization, and we're continuing to see that. So, a series of short videos with clear instructions on what is the practice we want them to do, help them build that habit. Right? Uh, the next thing is humans fundamentally pick the default choice. Whether you're installing a software on your computer, whether you buy a house and you basically take a lot of the defaults there, whether you buy a car or you make selections on your retirement plan, or selections on a lot of mutual funds and things like that, we make the default choice. We choose autopilot much more than we would think. um, and so then how do we as leadership development professionals pick better default choices for our learners? So then our job is not to offer everything to everyone, right? It's to offer the right learning to the right people at the right time in the right way. What's the right modality? So yeah, digital is very exciting, but if there is a leader or a group of leaders that we know benefits from deep face to face interaction, let's do that for them. If we know there's a group that benefits from digital, let's do that for them. If we know it's a sales organization and they're going to be really busy at the end of the year, let's do that for them. And, sort of going to the next one, we do mental accounting all the time, right? I've got vacation money, I've got lunch money, I've got shopping money. It all might be in the same account. Sometimes we have different accounts. And if you think about it, money is fundamentally fungible. It moves. The same 100 rupees from your vacation works for your lunch, it works for your shopping, it works anywhere. So, or the same 2000, given, currencies and all of that. But it's all money, right? Same thing goes for time. It's all essentially time, but people budget their time differently. People have accounting for this is the time I do this is the time I do that. So then, how do we get leaders to invest more time and money to intentionally develop their leadership skills? I'm talking internally. When you go to an individual leader and say, hey, I think you have opportunity to rise, but you need to do certain things before you're ready for that jump. uh, they might say, you know what, I'm ready for that jump right now. I don't know why you think I need anything else. So how do you get them to make that investment? And so one of the ways that, so Thaler and Sunstein in their Nudge book describe this as herd behavior. Uh, I like to more politely call it social influence. So we like to do what others in our herd or our tribe are doing. Uh, One statistic on the negative side, so obesity is actually contagious. If you eat by yourself, you eat a certain amount. If you eat with another person, you eat 35% more. If you eat with four people, you end up eating 75% more. This is why we feel really, really full when we go to restaurants. So social influence is sort of this secret and really, really powerful nudge. So, how do we use social influence for learning? A lot of that I talked about in sort of my digital learning success webinar. Get support from the top, put that pressure on them, use leaders as teachers, use learning partners, the buddy system. So, all of these things, I'm not going to dwell on this for a long time today, but just know that social learning that's becoming more and more prevalent, and we use this on some of our courses that we have. We really have cohorts interact with each other, we have them interact with a moderator, we have them interact with teams, and we see great impact through that. The next thing is feedback helps nudge behavior, right? If When you think about looking in the mirror in the morning, that's the simplest form of feedback. When you look and say, okay, does my face look okay? If you're a gentleman, you're like, okay, have I shaved right? If you're a lady, you might look at your hair and say, does this look okay? If you saw me in the starting of the video, I'm bald, I shave my head, so I don't really look at my hair as much, except to say, did I shave my whole head correctly? So uh, there's that. But that's the most basic form of feedback. Quick and accurate feedback helps nudge behavior. One of the clients we work with, we actually use a leader pulse tool. So what we're doing is we are allowing the leaders in the program, these are people who are leading functions, and we've set them up with a leader pulse tool with which they send out a pulse survey to their teams to say, how am I doing? you know hey, I want you to pay attention to, am I completely focused in the meeting, or do I look at my phone? So one question, and then they'll get that back from the team saying, you know what, uh, we had an all staff and I saw you looking at your phone a number of times. Or on a scale of 1 to 5, how present am I? 1 meaning not at all, 5 meaning 100%, and then you get a pulse back. So quick feedback, and we're allowing them to design sort of their own pulse. Like, what do I want to be pulsed about? Comparison is another heuristic. Humans like to compare things. We know this all the time, right? We look at websites to buy and we always compare. So when we think about comparison, we provide normative comparisons in our 360s. So we introduce this idea of 360 assessments for development, right? Not for selection, for development. So much more protected in terms of how that data is delivered to the learner. And I can geek out about that on another webinar another time. But what this is showing you, if you're looking at my screen, is here is how I rated myself, right? And uh, relative to sort of the normative group, wherever I rated myself, if I rated myself low, uh, where's the normative group? So it shows me sort of where am I showing up relative to a group of my peers. And we are able to segment this by industry, by location, in a lot of ways. And leaders like to know, where do I show up relative to my peers? So this person is showing up really low relative to their peers on being a quick study, but the same person is showing up pretty high in respect for differences. So relative to their peers, they are on the positive side of sort of the normative set here. So we provide comparisons to help people see where they are in their peer group. um, that kind of covers what I was talking about in terms of nudges overall, but I want to nudge you now in an interesting way. Friday is International Women's Day. So here's a link. We'll send you this link after the webinar. We'll send you my slides eventually. But uh, here's a nudge I want to give you. CCL wrote a book. Our vice president of research actually presented on this with People Matters recently, um, and we do a lot of work to help women leaders. But when you think about so one of the theme that we're working on sort of for International Women's Day is this idea of mentoring women, and specifically mentoring and championing and sponsoring women. And I'll explain what that means. But um, if you go to the site that I've sent the link to, it talks about this idea of women need a network of champions. why mentoring and sponsoring are important, particularly for women. This doesn't take the onus off the idea that women or men or really anyone in the workplace must advocate for themselves if they want to move their careers forward. But to succeed, they can't go it alone. All successful leaders need a network of champions, including mentors and sponsors. And just to differentiate those two, a mentor can be someone at any level. They can provide guidance for career choices. Both a mentee and a mentor drive the relationship. The mentor should be responsive to the needs of the mentee, and the mentee is helped to determine their path. A sponsor is, by definition, a senior leader in an organization, and they use their influence to help employees obtain high visibility assignments. So, if you think about all these nudges, the nudge I'm kind of pushing here is, if some of you have the ability to be a sponsor, or if some of you are looking for sponsors, or have the ability to talk to other senior leaders who might be sponsors, think about this for a second. So, Jennifer Martineau, who's our vice president of research and the author of the book Kick Some Glass, talks about the key element and the difference between a mentor and a sponsor, and why a sponsor is critical to advocate for that sponsoree's advancement and championing their potential. And what we see is there is an imbalance in sponsorship between men and women. And I've just shared two reasons why that might be. The resource we're going to give you is really interesting. It has a great deal of resources, but like attracts like, right? So we pointed out that only 24% of women, or there are only 24% women in senior leader roles. And since we know that there's an unconscious bias of like attracts like, um then uh, male leaders may unconsciously be inclined to mentor and champion other men. And there's sort of a flip side that women might not feel comfortable asking someone several levels up. So by sort of definition, you have this issue, and historical images play out, and women often have this challenge of the double bind of being seen as competent and likable, or likable but not both. So again, these are not my opinions. This is very well researched stuff, and we're going to send you a link. um, there are phenomenal resources here. Nudging is not explicitly called out, but I wanted to share this because I wanted to share a nudge with you, right? My nudge to you is, if you're in a position to think about mentoring and sponsoring, please take this opportunity and think about it. In addition to how might you leverage nudging for your work with leaders. With that, I'm going to sort of switch off sharing and
Perfect.
perfect. All right. Have I switched off sharing, Valerie? Oh,
Uh,
I'm still there.
yes, you are still sharing your screen, Samir.
My back?
Yes, you're
I think
back.
I'm back. Okay, perfect.
Yeah, perfect. I think that was a really good segue into all of the questions that our audiences have. I know we have just a few minutes to address some of the questions. And speaking of nudging, I think, with the International Women's Day coming up, it's very relevant that, mentorship and leadership development plays a crucial role in achieving gender equality in the boardroom, in the workplace, in all the different sectors. So speaking of that, I'm going to just take the question that Ashish Das has asked.
Mm-hmm.
I think this question had come earlier in the session itself when
Mm-hmm.
you had started to define nudging. Um,
Mm-hmm.
he asks, how do you define the thin line between
Yeah.
psychophancy and nudging? So, kind
Yeah.
of, advancing your own agenda versus
Yeah.
nudging the leader in the right
Yeah.
direction.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, nudging, there is, so I don't know about psychophancy, but there is a question of sort of the ethics of nudging, right? Because when you think about some of the nudges that are made by firms who are trying to get you to buy things, then there is clearly an ethical issue there. So if you go through the book, they very clearly sort of call out don't be evil, which is a simple sort of thing to say, hard to do. A real easy example of where nudging is used badly is extended warranties for devices. So if you buy iPhone, they will sell you an extended warranty, and that extended warranty is typically about 10% of the cost of the good, but only 1% of devices fail. So you just paid 9% extra, right? So it's definitely a difficult question, and something that I think there is just a moral compass that you have to apply to nudging.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and I guess like at the C-suite level, it kind of, you have to be more mindful about,
Mhm.
which coaches, which, stakeholders kind of nudge you in different directions. So
Yeah.
I think that also becomes quite crucial when you
Mhm.
talk about, the difference between advancing your own agenda and nudging.
Mhm.
Another question is from Riddhi. So she was asking about the nudging app. I think if you could just, maybe in like a short answer, if you could
Mhm.
explain to her, does it remind about the
Yeah.
lessons as well, or just about the
Yeah.
session?
So it actually gives you lessons, whether through some quick images or text or short video. It actually teaches in the app. So it calls you back. It teaches you something. It typically gives you a bit of quiz to test knowledge, and it gives you sort of exercises to go and do in the workplace, and then come back and reflect. So those are sort of three quick things it does. Not necessarily a reminder to attend sessions. I mean, it can do that as well, but the nudges are to actually practice.
Okay, so they are actionable items that kind
Hmm.
of are reinforced that, hey, you need to get into this particular habit.
Yep.
Okay, perfect, perfect. The next question is, what are the two steps or maybe one step that you can suggest talent leaders that, as an HR professional, they should take to nudge the C-suite level leaders in the right way? So I guess
Yeah.
this person, I think she or he has not mentioned their name.
Yeah.
But as an HR leader,
Hmm.
it kind of gets tough
Yeah.
to interact with the C-suite level when it
Yep.
comes to pushing them towards
Hmm.
or nudging them towards the right learning
Yeah.
initiative. So, what
Yeah.
would you say to the talent leader?
It's a great question. Obviously, one of the challenges, I think, uh, senior leaders appreciate data a lot. So I think the more you can bring data to that discussion, and I would leverage probably this idea of perhaps loss aversion a little bit, and maybe even social influence. So when I say loss aversion, uh, there are a few examples of senior leaders who have uh, fallen from grace, right? And you don't want to overuse something like that, but if you share this opportunity of saying, look, why don't you learn while you are safe? You've just you're not yet exposed to some of the errors that some others have made.
Mm.
uh, this is a great way for you to practice in a safe place, because learning typically, if you go away and learn, gives you an opportunity to learn in a safe place. If you position that way to say, look, you're getting to play in a sandbox instead of making these mistakes with real money and real people. So that's one. The other piece might be social influence, to say, look, other people at your level will be attending these programs. It's an opportunity for you to network and learn from others. So those might be ways to push that, in terms of learning for the C-suite themselves. And I think in terms of investing in leader development for the organization, um, I would again probably point to some data in terms of organizations that show mature leadership development strategies tend to show better business outcomes. And I can point to some of the research. There was one slide in my deck, but organizations that invest in leader development have better business outcomes, profitability, revenue growth, all of those things, than others. So it's actually a business imperative and not a nice to have.
Yeah. So kind of back yourself with the data and go into the discussion with kind of that getting the business buy-in as well into that
Yeah.
particular learning initiative. I think that's very valuable for HR leaders, especially trying to conduct all these different learning activities. We have time for maybe just one more question. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so Vijay Kumar is asking about two types of nudges that are external, that are driven by the company, and internal, which are driven by the
Mm-hmm.
individual. So kind of how do you strike a balance and bring these two
Mm-hmm.
together for
Yeah.
maximum ROI? So if
Yeah, yeah. I'm reading Vijay's questions and Sunil's as well. So given in the interest of time, I think um, I there is no one answer. I will say nudging is an emergent field. Sometimes you're going to sort of don't rely on technology entirely. So some nudges that are driven by the company, driven by systems, you can do those easily. If you're running a program, like I'm running a program internally, and I'm using email, and literally the statements in my email are my nudges. So it can be as simple as that. What you say in the email, you are the champions, right? Encourage them. That's a nudge. Oh, you're falling behind your peers. That's a nudge. It can be super simple. The question of sort of personalized nudging and getting into invading data privacy, as well as key points about taking care of your corporate and HR strategy, I would go back to sort of this piece about as long as you don't take away choice and you don't in any way punish someone based on something that you know about them, and also not expose what you know about them to others, you have largely stayed in line with uh, sort of compliance and data privacy. So if you publish a list of a leaderboard, right, with every employee there, so going back to Three Idiots, right, you don't want to do that. Then you're in data privacy trouble. Also, the people who are below the top 10 are just feeling terrible. You've not done anything good for them.
yeah.
So you don't want to do that, but you do want to encourage the people at the top and tell people in an anonymous fashion, hey, you can push up. So that's my quick 2 cents. I could have, these are great questions. I would love to have a deeper conversation, but I know we're out of time.
Yeah, and I think once after the presentation, everybody's just kind of introspecting and kind of coming up with all these questions. But it was really great how you summed up all the three questions and gave them kind of a cohesive answer to their questions in the organization, because this is such a vast topic. And thank you for sharing the research as well, and the different books that you talked about. I'm
Mhm.
sure for me personally, I'm going to definitely go and take a read at some point. So thank you so much, Samir, for
Thank you.
with us today, and thank you to all the audience members for your wonderful questions and for being engaged in the webinar. And I would like to once again thank our webcast partner for today, Center for Creative Leadership. And Samir, hope to see you again with many more interesting topics such as these. Also, for the audience, please give your feedback in the survey link provided in the chat session, because your input definitely matters for all of our webinars. So stay tuned for the next module later in March. And that concludes our webcast for today. Thank you, Samir. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.